I was on Twitter one day and I kept watching people retweeting this gentleman called Dr. Aseem Malhotra, and he was taking on the sugar lobby. And as you know, that I've been fighting Coke and all the colas, and I've been talking about diabetes in India a lot and saying that processed food is largely responsible for the sudden rise of obesity and diabetes in kids in India. And I've been saying to all the celebrities and friends of mine, saying, guys, you have to be responsible. You have to stop getting kids to buy the products because you just advertise them all the time and promote them all the time. And I know that you wouldn't give them to your kids, so why are you then selling it to other people's kids and getting them to be sick? So I came across Aseem, and he fights the sugar lobby, and he's made a lot of discoveries in medicine, in sugar, and what it does to you, and where we are headed if you're not careful. So that's Aseem, Dr. Aseem Malhotra. I am not going to talk to you that much about the sugar lobby because I know it gets you into trouble. But Aseem recently got famous all over again because he wrote this book called the Pioppi diet book. And he talks about a kind of a diet, and maybe you should tell people about that. But don't switch off, because actually what I want to talk to Aseem is that they always say that mother's food is best. And I've always wondered why, and there's some truth in that. And the question I really want to ask you is, what does love have to do with it? Cooking with love? Eating with love? Is there any kind of scientific ideas you can give us saying, if you cook and eat with love, your nutrition, your cells respond to that attitude of compassion and love and actually absorb food in the way that they should? So we'll come to that, but tell them about this book first.
Thanks, Shekhar. So Pioppi is a southern Italian tiny village with a population of almost 200 people. It's actually been described as the world's healthiest village because the average life expectancy in this village for men and women is close to 90. They live almost 10 years more than the average Tour de France cyclist, but without doing any so-called prescribed exercise. There are no gyms in this village, there are no supermarkets. So myself and my co-author, who's a former international athlete, we went to this village to try and discover what were the real secrets of the way these people live. And could it tell us something about how we can move forward in the Western world and in other countries to try and combat this growing burden of chronic disease and obesity? And we tried to tally that with what we know of the up-to-date independent science in medicine and nutrition, and ultimately bust many myths that are prevalent in today's society, which are actually causing so much harm, Shekhar, to people, especially children. You talked about sugar. Sugar is one of the few substances we ingest that has absolutely no nutritional value. There's no biological requirement for sugar. Yet it's become so prevalent in our food environment that it's now public enemy number one in the Western diet, and it's driving this epidemic of type 2 diabetes and all the other associated diseases, including heart disease. So for me, that's been part of that campaign and mission. But coming back to Pioppi, what's interesting is being with these villagers, we learned that their traditional diet, when you go back to the 60s and 70s, and that time period is particularly important because that's when there was a big concern about increasing death rates from heart disease in the USA and in other European countries. Sugar was consumed quite rarely. In fact, we asked the people there, how often would you have dessert? Their answer was only on Sundays, once a week. And think about it now, many people are probably having dessert with 3 meals a day when you think about the sugared cereal and the juice and the sauces and all the other things that are loaded with the sugar. So
yeah,
I think
in India, every time we finish, the word is meethe mein kya hai?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's nothing wrong with having these as treats, of course, but we have to think a little bit more carefully about how we eat. So I think that's part of the story of the secrets of longevity of this village.
But there's sugar in everything.
That's the problem. So one of the tactics deployed, you talk about the sugar lobby. I have, and other people have said sugar is a new tobacco, not just because of the effects on its health, but because actually, when you look back at the history of tobacco, it took about 50 years between the first links between smoking and lung cancer before we had any effective really regulation that reduce the effective availability of tobacco in the environment. So, banning advertising of cigarettes, the association of sport. I grew up as a very passionate fan of cricket. I used to play cricket. And I remember growing up in England, although I was born in India, we used to have these Benson and Hedges test matches. Even India played test matches against England, and they were sponsored by a cigarette company. So, it's not that long ago. Now, the reason I talk about sugar in the same way is that how tobacco successfully were able to stop regulation happening for those 50 years, 5 decades, think about it, between scientific links between smoking and lung cancer, is because they had a very effective corporate strategy. It's called the corporate playbook, if you like, of big tobacco, which was basically denial that smoking was linked to heart disease and lung cancer, confusing the public, and buying the loyalty of scientists as well. And actually what we found is that there are many similarities with the sugar lobby and big tobacco. And for many years, people think that sugar's fine and you can burn off the calories by doing exercise. And the reality tells us that actually that's not true. There's a very interesting study that came out of America, which actually looked at what in the food environment can predict in different populations in countries, looking at many countries throughout the world, what would predict their increase in type 2 diabetes over a number of years. And what they found was that when people consumed more sugar, to be more specific, every excess 150 calories of sugar that they were eating compared to fat or protein, or was available, if you like, in the food environment. So typical of a can of cola that you mentioned, there was an 11-fold increase in the prevalence of type 2 diabetes in the population. And that was independent of activity and independent of body weight. So another way of saying this or explaining it to the layperson is that even if you're slim and you do lots of exercise, if you're consuming too much sugar, you're still going to increase your risk of type 2 diabetes. So that's really the problem we're dealing with.
Let's talk about the sugar. When you said how many calories of sugar?
Well, every excess 150 calories, but
1 teaspoonful of sugar.
So 150 calories of sugar is about almost 9 teaspoons of sugar. Now, just to put it in perspective, Shekhar, one typical can of cola has around almost 9 teaspoons.
9?
9 teaspoons. And the average UK citizen is consuming around anything from about 18 teaspoons of what we call added sugar in the diet. And the limit recommendation now by the World Health Organization, which I think is important because people ask, well, how much sugar can I have, or what's okay? Their limit for an average adult now is 6 teaspoons, no more than 6 teaspoons a day. And for a child in America who's aged between 4 and 8, they say 3. Now, a typical candy bar, chocolate bar, has almost triple the amount that's recommended as a limit for a child in the US.
And the can of cola has
triple. 1.5 times for the average for an adult, and that's providing you have no other sources of sugar in your diet, Shekhar. But we know people are having sugar. You said in everything. More than 70% of what you find in the supermarket now has added sugar in there. So one of the arguments about, if you want to give the argument saying it's about personal responsibility and about education.
I just want to ask you, what time is it now? It must be about lunchtime almost.
Yeah.
So I've had a bowl of cherries. I've had 2 oranges and a banana. I was thinking I better eat healthy. Is that too much sugar?
Well, it's interesting. So when we talk about the limits on sugar, it doesn't include whole food. The fact that you're having whole food, Shekhar, is actually, you're doing a lot better for your health than most people. Because you've got the fiber in the fruit and other nutrients. When it becomes a juice, you take the fiber out, it's a pure liquid sugar, and you're not going to feel full, so that's a problem. And juice is also a problem, and there are limits on that. But even for fruit, I would say, for people who are vulnerable at risk of type 2 diabetes, either family history or if they're pre-diabetic or even have type 2 diabetes, fruit should probably be consumed in a little bit less amount. So I would say we recommend in the Pioppi diet no more than 2 to 3 portions of whole fruit a day. Lots of vegetables, of course, is good, but not too much fruit.
So I've overdone it today.
No, you're fine. You'll be all right.
Okay.